What's happening, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. During Mental Health Month, I was fortunate enough to talk to student athlete Allie Meehan, who was looking to become a sports psychologist after college, as well as Dr. Jared Spencer, who has been in the field for quite some time and helped me tremendously during my athletic career. Now, I get to speak with Dr. Megan Cannon, who I shared the same campus with at Wilkes University and has become a doctor in the space where she's helped athletes all over the world. We discuss her career path, some of the ways that she's had to evolve with the changing tide of mental health, and as always, we get some great advice. So I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation with Dr. Megan Cannon, and as always, I appreciate you listening to the A2A podcast. So welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast, and today I'm sitting down with a former Wilkes Colonel, somebody that I met on campus, Miss Megan Cannon, who's now Dr. Megan Cannon, and back then, obviously, we were just students trying to figure out, our way into this world. And, now we're journalist and doctor, right? So it's really, really awesome that I get to sit down and talk to you, especially with it being Mental Health Month and all the things that you do in the mental health space. But before we dig into the conversation, I want to give you the platform to, discuss who you are, where you're from, and a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's so good to see you. And, we've known each other for a really long time. As Ryan said, I was a fellow Wilkes Colonel and at the time dove into the world of psychology. And from there, I went down to Nova Southeastern University and got my PhD in clinical psych. And it was kind of this beautiful, happy accident that there was a sports psychology clinic and program on campus. I didn't know about sports psych. I grew up in the world of athletics. And so I played softball, I swam, I danced. It was the world I grew up in that I had since retired from. But then when I got to grad school, it was this awesome fusion of these two worlds I knew, the psychology, more recent part for me, and then the athlete piece that I, for years did that grind and did that life. And so it was at that time I decided that that was the area in psychology I wanted to pursue. And since then have just had amazing opportunities getting to work with athletes individually, along with consulting with teams at the high school, collegiate, and club level. Gotten to talk at conferences, all about different sports psychology and mental health, mental emotional wellness for athletes. And so it's just been a really cool ride that I never would have anticipated, when we were walking on Wilkes' campus trying to just figure out what was next. And so it's been just a really cool journey. I get to meet a lot of really awesome people. And ultimately, my professional and personal goal is really just helping equip student athletes with skills, knowledge, and tools that, yes, they can utilize in their sport, to help them perform to their full potential. But my favorite thing about sports psychology is that all of the tools that we talk about that they're applying on the field or court or pool also transition to life. It's the same set of skills. It's just using them in a different space. And it's through sport that I can then help teach these young men and women those tools to help them kind of thrive. And so it's been a really cool and interesting journey. And I'm excited to talk, about that today even further.
Mm-hmm. So before we even get into the career side of things, let's talk about the athlete side of things. So you said you grew up playing a bunch of different sports. What was it about sports, and where did the influence come from for you to dive into so many different things? No pun intended with swimming, but what was the influence like for you to make you want to be an athlete?
I think it was, my parents fortunately just kind of tried out a whole bunch of different things. And so, I was like signed up for soccer and basketball and swimming. It's like, it was just, I think what happened at the time and in growing up during that time, specialization wasn't as common. And so I had the ability to maintain, doing multiple sports. And I think for me, it was awesome. It was a social thing. And I think, all the athletes I talk about, it's or talk with, I always ask them, why do you do your sport? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, well, my friends, and people are there. So there was a huge social piece to it, but it was also just getting, with softball to be outside, and with swimming, in the summer, I was outside too. I was on a lifeguard. Like, it was just this whole community of people. And I get to spend multiple hours after school with my friends, learning different things, getting stronger, kind of traveling, having those moments on the buses together or in tournaments. And, and so I think there was a huge social piece of it for me, along with, the challenge of it. I mean, that those intense moments when you're walking up to the plate and there's two outs, but bases are loaded. And I mean, just those moments that are really cool. And it's hard to get in anything else besides sport, or in
Hmm.
swimming when you're standing up on the block and you're by yourself and it's like, all right, I know what I got to do. There's people around me, but I'm the only one that can do this right now. And so having that experience, I appreciate both the individual sports like swimming, along with the team sports where you're really interdependent on everybody else on the field. And then with dance, it was kind of the same thing, getting to um, perform in a different way, but you're really just getting to kind of play this role in this character, and then get to do it with people that you really enjoy as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and you even mentioned, back then specialization wasn't a thing, right? Like you rarely had friends that were just baseball players or they were just football players, right? Like everybody was looking for that crossover discipline that they got. And you played, a number of sports in high school. What was the plan for you as an athlete? Because, back then, like we said, you don't really know what you want to do, but you know that sports is a constant. You're having fun with it. So, what was that athletic plan for you? Did you think that sports were going to be your ticket to, college and to that next level?
I had not a clue. And I think there's so much more information out there, and I sometimes reflect back of like, man, if I knew what I knew now back then, I feel like things would have. I don't know. I probably would have made different choices. Because for me, I chose to retire. Like, and it's so interesting. Again, just reflecting back, like with softball, I was so stressed and anxious about it, like all the time.
Hmm.
And it was this thing that growing up was so fun. But then in high school, when I was like, this matters so much and it's like varsity, I was like, wow, this thing that used to be so fun is now so stressful. And with swimming, I literally, Wilkes didn't have a pool.
Hmm.
And my dad was like, well, do you want to go look at Kings? Which, for anybody listening, is not unfamiliar with that area, literally 2 blocks away, like
Yeah.
2 blocks away. And I was like, no, because they could swim there, and I had no interest. Like, I was burnt out from now I can label it as like, it just a lot of performance anxiety. But we didn't have those resources to kind of fill in the gaps of just like the what at the time for me became this like overwhelmingly miserable experience of just being so stressed and sitting in class being like, oh my gosh, it's 2 hours to practice, and what if I miss that? Like, it just, my head was constantly going about it. And so I made the choice to retire from swimming and softball, but then I continued to dance, because for me, that's still, it was a different kind of pressure that was a little bit, I don't know, it was just a lot more fun for me at that moment in
Hmm.
time. So I danced on the team in college, and then it was my minor as well. And so I stayed in that vein. Um, but it is, it's so interesting just thinking back of things that I know now, especially with the role of college athletics, which the role of having sports like resources to kind of help athletes label some of those experiences and help them through it. Because I just kind of think back to, wow, if I had some of the resources that at least I hope that I'm providing athletes now, I probably would have looked at, playing in college,
Hmm.
and doing something in addition to dance, or, but those things just didn't exist. And so that's
Yeah.
why I love that, now we're, yes, seeing it at the college level, especially in a lot of those bigger programs, that there's places on campus and resources that are available. And slowly, kind of over time, a little bit more on like the individual athlete more so than the program or the school, but it's trickling down to the younger ages, which I think is so important and really, really needed.
Hmm. Now, you talked about how psychology was something that you were very interested in and obviously passionate about. I mean, it's your career now, but when you're going on to college, is it something that, do you declare a major right off the bat, or are you figuring things out? I mean, I changed my major 3 times when we were at Wilkes, right? Like it was
Yeah.
business, it was this, and then I was like, oh, journalism sounds fun. I'm doing very well in my English classes. Maybe I can be a writer, right? And then I figured it
Yeah.
out. What was that like for you? There's seldom students that really know what they want. How did you get into psychology?
Oh my gosh, I love that question, because with a lot of the high school athletes I work with, they're like, I need to figure out my major and what I want to do, and everybody else knows. And I'm like, no,
No, they don't.
no, no, they don't. No, they don't. It is maybe that rare small percentage of people that actually have an idea. Because I think, in high school, yeah, there's classes that expose you to different things, but nowhere near what's out there. And so I happened to take a psychology class in high school, which in this like crazy full circle moment was actually taught by the football coach, which I think is this like beautiful, I don't know, just a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I took a psychology class and I was the only one of my friends that did well at it and liked it. And I was like, huh, interesting. I had no idea what, what careers were like or all the different areas of it. But I was like, okay, I'm good at this. And I'm the only one out of my friends that's like kind of digging this. So maybe this is something. And so I decided I went into undecided, because I didn't know. I had an idea that maybe psychology was something, but after taking one class in high school, there's no way, have any idea like even what it is or what careers look like or opportunities. And so I had an idea that psych might be a thing, and so I went in undecided, did the gen eds, got those out of the way, but then intentionally took a couple psychology courses, beyond the initial like required psychology 101 situation, just to learn more about the field. I had joined like the psychology club just to learn about what it was like. And it wasn't until the end of my sophomore year that I actually declared the major. And I think it was like the last, I think you had to do it by the time you went into junior year.
Mhm.
And so I was definitely behind, or not even behind, but it was just the timeline that worked for me because I didn't, I had no idea. And so I took the time to kind of learn and understand what the field was, along with in psychology, there, when you sign on the dotted line of like, yeah, this is my major, there's also kind of this unwritten commitment then to continuing your education and postgraduate work, whether at a master's or a doctoral level. So it was that awareness of, okay, I am choosing to do this and I'm committing to this. But not only am I committing to this major now, but because of the major I'm choosing, there will have to be some beyond Wilkes education, just with kind of what the field is.
Mhm. Yeah, so once you figure that out and the gen eds are done and now you're really getting into it, what was the light bulb moment for you that that was your field, that you were where you belonged?
I've always been, I mean, my friend, like when I get close to people, I'm definitely a lot louder, but I've always kind of been like the observer. And I would sit back and kind of watch, and that was just naturally who I was.
Mhm.
And so I just remember being in these classes, and I was like, I'm learning and putting words to like human behavior. And that's always just been something I was like, I don't know, I would just observe. And it was, I don't know, it was just kind of this moment of, this is a field that is doing something that I kind of did always. And I think the class I remember, and I think I've told him this, there was a neuropsych class. And I was like, the brain is so cool. Like that, it was like, that was so awesome just learning. I mean, we barely even know how the brain works, but just all of these different things about it, and like how and its development, and how if one part of your brain, like for individuals that are born without the ability of sight or sound, how your brain like adapts to it, or the plasticity. I was like, this is so freaking awesome. And so I think it was kind of a combination of that. And then once that class I had, I was like, all right, that's it, I am like doing this stuff forever. I can nerd out on this always. Yeah, and just it's the study of people, which we're around people all the time. And so
Mhm.
it just kind of worked.
Yeah, so from there, let's dig into kind of the trajectory of your career. Obviously, you end up getting your PhD and everything else. Where do you go after you're finished with your true academic years? Because obviously you're always learning and evolving and things like that, so you're never far from academics. But what once you have your PhD, and it's something that athletes and students alike definitely go through, where they're like, okay, I'm done, where do I go? And you kind of have
Yeah,
this which way kind of fork in the road. How am I going to now make money? How is this going to pay the bills for me? How
yeah.
did you kind of navigate that once you're done, and where do you go?
So it was interesting, and sometimes I'll talk to students that are interested in going into sports psych, and for me, like not taking the gap year, I know I would have never gone back to grad school, so I went right from undergrad right to grad school. So
Mhm.
um, blessing and a curse. Like there's great ways of doing it, but I think that direction, although for me it was like what absolutely needed to happen, because I would have never like gone through all the loops that are required to do that, if I had gone out and started making money and a job or whatever. Um, but I think it also then provided me less time to actually think about that. Like,
Hmm.
because it was just like, well, now I go here, and then I got to go here, and then I go here, and so it just so happened, because I knew sports psychology was a thing, and I had done it at school. There just at the time was not sports psychology pre and postdoc internships. There was one in the country. I did not get it, unfortunately, but it was, I mean, now that's very different, which is very cool. There's a lot more opportunities for people to train. But I knew it was an area I wanted to get back to. And so, right when, so you graduate, but you still can't do anything yet in psychology. So you have to do like post grad, like 2,000 hours of supervised work, and then sit for this big licensing exam. So, like, it takes even after you graduate, like around a year and a half to 2 years to actually be able to then like, all right, so now we got the green light, we can go. And during that time, I had there was an article in the newspaper about this sports psychology private practice back in the area that I was originally from. At this time, I was living in California doing my pre and postdoc, and there was a private practice in the area I grew up in that was focusing on athletes. And I think you had Dr. Jared Spencer on here a couple weeks ago with Mind of the
Hmm.
Athlete. And so I had reached out to him and I was like, hey, like I just got done doing the sports psych rotation. I've just started my pre-doc internship. Like, are there opportunities for postdoc? And he was like I just needed to get my license. And so we had communicated for like that 3-year period of my pre and postdoc and license with the plan that I would then transition back. And I was like, okay, I have a line back into this area of psychology that I really want to be in. And so I, at that point, had kind of lined that opportunity up. And once I got licensed, made this like grandiose road trip from Los Angeles all the way back to Pennsylvania, and had the opportunity to start there and dive back into the sports psych athlete world that for me was just so much more fulfilling than I was doing like community mental health stuff, which is very fulfilling in its own right. But it just like for me was not, it didn't excite me.
Hmm.
And so then I was able to transition back to the sport athlete world. And myself, him, there was another sports psychologist on staff and a sport nutritionist. We all, were kind of tackling this mental health and, mission together, which was really fun and exciting. And so it was fortunately a pretty nice transition. I learned a lot in the process. And it was, at that point in time, since I kind of knew the area of psych I wanted to go in, I was then able to like look and seek out those opportunities, which at the time, and it's different now, but they were
Hmm.
really few and far between. So it was a nice opportunity that just really worked.
Yeah, and you just mentioned it. It was there were not a lot of opportunities back then, and mental health in the topic itself has grown tremendously. You have more athletes talking about it, on the professional level. So and that has trickled down into the college aspect of it as well, and then even the high school aspect of it. So it's something that has become more and more popular. And obviously from your standpoint, you've been along that ride. How have you seen kind of the evolution of this topic and the information that has come from everyone kind of getting behind athletes mental health being the number one thing that they should be focused on?
Yeah, it has really been an interesting evolution. So, like 2016, the chief medical officer in the NCAA was like, all right, we got to do something about this. And it was like this huge shift in we need to make these resources as accessible as athletic training for athletes that get a physical injury. Um, it was exciting because it was like, oh my gosh, all these things are going to happen. But, different schools chose to use these grants and monies in like different ways. Some of
Hmm.
them did allocate it in a mental health direction. Others were like, well, it's like wellness. And they like, used it in different ways. But one thing that it's now starting to happen. I think there's number one, we're hearing so much more about it. And I love the bravery and the courage of, the Simone Biles, the Michael Phelps, the Allison Schmitz, the Kevin Loves that are coming out and being like, yeah, no, I'm not okay. And if it's okay for me to not be okay, hey, you 15-year-old, 20-year-old, it's okay for you not to be okay. And coaches and organizations, we need like, so that's been a huge, I think, thing that's really helped propel some of the decisions that were made back in 2016 that NCAA like wanted to make this a thing. But I think that the challenge with psychology, and this is any area of it, people are kind of afraid, right? Psychology, there's a stigma with it. It's like, ooh, I don't know. And rightfully so. So I think there's one of the things coming up the curve has been educating people of, I'm not joking, Ryan. Whenever I tell people what I do, 99% of the time there are two sentences that one follows the other. Oh my gosh, that is so cool. But like, what do you do every time? Because it sounds cool. The word sport is in it. It's like very sexy and like
Mhm.
culturally we really idealize sports, but they have no clue literally what it is. Even as recent as last week, I told someone what I did. They were like, what? I've like literally never heard of that before. Like, what do you do? And so educating is a big part of it, but it's really cool because for the last like 8 years, I've been on Indeed and I just have like signed up for sports like emails and the amount of jobs there used to be at best one, maybe two jobs a year that would come up. And it was huge, huge athletic departments. It would be a Stanford, an Alabama, like, and that's it.
Mhm.
But now there's like 10, which maybe doesn't sound like a ton, but just from where it started, there's at least almost once a month now that
Mhm.
there's new positions opening. I'm also on some sports like listservs, and there's more postdoc opportunities that are happening. There's more jobs at NCAA institutions, all mental health related, 100%. Which is interesting and something that people that are choosing to go into sports psychology really need to be mindful of is there are sports psychology degrees, but you can graduate that without having a clinical license.
Mhm.
And all of these jobs are very clinically based. And so it's been really interesting kind of tracking and seeing how one job a year has now turned into 10, sometimes even 12. Like you just kind of see them rolling out. And so it's neat to see that happen. There's still a long way for it to go, both in educating people of how a sports psychologist could be of help to them in their program or their athletes individually. But it definitely has absolutely been growing, which is really, really cool to watch.
Mhm. So I want to go to, the question that you're asked of what do you do, right? Like, and you obviously have to you have to explain that to people all the time. And you now have your own practice and everything else where you've established things. How do you explain this to people of what you actually do?
Yeah, well, I'm always like, great question. So I've I compare it to strength and conditioning for your brain.
Mhm.
Athletes, you show up whatever sport you do with your bag of equipment, whether it's cleats, shin guards, sticks, bats, gloves, helmets, whatever. You show up with this bag of equipment that you could not engage in your sport without.
Mhm.
An area of equipment we don't talk about equip athletes with is equipment for your brain. And your brain is the thing that controls everything. And so sports psychology is helping athletes develop equipment for their brain and emotions, which as human beings, we all have. So it's quite silly. We don't really do it as common. Well, it's getting more commonplace. And so with the athletes, I on one hand teach them and provide some education of like, no, you're not weird for experiencing this is totally normal and this is what's
Mhm.
happening in your body and this is why. And so on top of that why, because I was like, you got to build the foundation, and athletes in their training, they learn why you're doing certain drills and the purpose and intention of things. And so that's where we start with the why, and then we build tools on top of it. And so I have some athletes that are straight sport performance where they're practicing really, really well and excelling, but then the moment they set foot in a game, it's gone. They're stressed. They like their body physically is engaging in that game differently. Their brain is all over the place. So I have some that are very specific sport performance athletes, but then I also have athletes where it's mental health. That's anxiety, depression, eating disorders, some of those more typical clinical issues. They just happen to be athletes. And so, as a sports psychologist, I'm better able to meet them where they're at. Um, Similarly to a child psychologist working with a kid versus a 50-year-old. I'm working in this space more familiar just from working in this space with no, you're not just going to retire from your sport because it stresses you out.
Mhm.
Here are things that we can do to help you do that? And then some of the dynamics of working within the team or an athletic department or some of the additional demands that they're under. Like, they don't need to explain those things because that's just the world that I work in. And so, from a mental health standpoint, it's a way of, from like a clinical standpoint, it's a way of being able to really meet them where they're at and having an automatic or better understanding of some of the stressors within the athletic world. I then get to learn the stressors more unique to them, but there's already this like baseline level of understanding that with my clinical clients, we're able to kind of start that conversation a little bit more progressed than more of like a general practitioner who maybe doesn't live in the sport world and understand some of those like ins and outs and nuances that ultimately are going to impact that athlete, not only from a performance standpoint, but also like mental health as well.
Mhm. So one of the things that I've been reading about when it comes to mental health is, you know, the good thing is that these campuses are now providing a lot more of the resources. However, a lot of the students are afraid to use those resources because they feel like if they're even seen going to, the on-campus mental health space, that their coach is then going to go over and ask what's going on, or that what they talk about is going to be, pushed on to their coaches and administrators. How do you combat these things when it comes to you being utilized as a resource? And are you being approached more from students or student athletes, or is it more their parents that are then saying, hey, this is something that we really think would help you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And there's actually a statistic about that where student athletes, they have, clinical or like mental health struggles at like a similar frequency or prevalence than like the NARPs, those like non-athletic regular people. So it's like around 30 to 33%, but only 10% of student athletes seek help.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also some research that suggests and support that student athletes, although it's the same frequency or prevalence, the intensity of their mental health struggles is higher, which makes sense because they have two full-time jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
so it really does make sense. And so, the thing that, and every campus operates a little bit differently, but there are things in place to protect confidentiality of the athletes. And so if I'm consulting with a team, that's something that, like a collegiate program, that's something I talk about with the coach day one of, hey, we'll have these team meetings. But I also offer, if it's like in a state that I'm licensed in, like I also offer if the athletes want to connect individually. If an athlete reaches out and connects individually, I will let you know that that person, we've had a meeting, but I cannot tell you and I will not tell you what we talk about unless there's some like, suicidality or safety issue that now we need to like really provide some additional support. And so then the first thing that when that athlete comes in, I always let them know, hey, I need to tell, like, I will tell your coach that we're meeting, but any of the information that we share, it's in our bubble of confidentiality, and they will not know what we're talking about, who we're talking about, like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, and again, like every university is a little bit different, but that's generally the the role of confidentiality, within the university setting. And there's like great debate, and because sometimes coaches want to know more, but then the counselors push back of like, well, no, you can't know more because then they won't come.
Mm-hmm.
Some campuses will have different waiting rooms or different access areas. Not every campus, is equipped for that, but some of those like larger, bigger programs do, because it has been a problem of, like the star quarterback that's like you see on TV every Saturday getting filmed as they're in the waiting room. Like, so there is very much a validity to those student athletes' concern of,
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't necessarily be seen there, but the schools are recognizing that, and there are some structures put in play of maybe those athletes don't go to the counseling center. At the university I was at Nova, the athletes never went to the counseling center. They came to us, and we were located in a totally different place that also housed physical therapy. So if people saw them walking in the door, they could be going to physical therapy, they could be going to the athletic trainers, because it was all
Mm-hmm.
the same door, just where they went after that was a little bit different. So there are some things in place to help protect the confidentiality of the athletes, to ideally over time help them be more comfortable in seeking help and support, because we're we're human beings. If there's stuff going on outside your sport, it's going to bleed into your sport. Just as,
Hmm.
if there's, you had a bad game or a crappy practice and you go and sit in class and you have a hard time not thinking about it. We're not compartmentalized individuals. So there are fortunately those things that are happening. And whenever I'm talking with high school students or even like parents of student athletes, I always encourage them, if you are exploring playing your sport collegially, absolutely ask the questions in those recruiting interviews, talks with coaches, campus tours. What are the resources available? Are there some different, do the student athletes have a different door, or is there something in the athletic facility where the counselors come in? Because that is a thing that happens where
Hmm.
the counselors will come over, or sometimes their office is literally housed where athletic training is. And so asking those questions before you set foot on campus, just so you know, because I don't think, it's in this beautiful world that we put in our brains. It's like, oh no, everything's going to be fine. I'm never going to need to use that. But like, what if you do?
Hmm.
And the reality is, more often than not, there's going to be something that kind of throws you for a moment, and it happens to everybody and it's not a bad thing. And so just knowing what the resources are in advance and having an awareness, and yeah, maybe you never do use it, but at least so that if you ever did, you feel comfortable with what that school has, along with you just know what's available to you.
Hmm. Yeah, and are you seeing, you know, is it more the parents that come to you, or is it the students that are coming and kind of seeking you out?
It's both. So I'll have, generally for the like high school athletes, it's a parent that will reach out. And sometimes it's initiated by the parents, but then other times, and I find this so cool, the athletes, I'll hear from the parents, like they're asking to talk to someone. And so
Hmm.
we searched out and found you, or we found, so it's actually a little bit of both, which I think is so cool that the younger generations are, the kids in middle school, high school, and college now, they're talking about this stuff a lot more openly than we ever did, and our parents and their parents' parents. And so it's a little bit of both. The moms make the phone call or dads, because generally for the athletes below the age of 18, like they are the ones that would have to consent to treatment in typical circumstances. So they're the ones making the phone call and setting up the meeting, but sometimes it's initiated by the parents. I would say it's a good 60-40.
Hmm.
60% initiated by the parents, 40% I'll hear from the parents. They ask to talk to someone.
Yeah. So when and we've said this, the whole mental health space has grown tremendously, and you talked about there's more jobs, there's more opportunities, but then the kind of the stressors that a lot of these kids have to kind of go through and put up with these days is completely different, right? You have technology, you have everything else. So how have you seen things evolve over time, and how hard is it for you to have to kind of roll with these same punches? Because while they're putting up with it and they have to deal with the social media and, the journalists writing about it, you're trying to combat it. So what types of things have you kind of developed on your own to combat these things that obviously couldn't be found in your textbooks because they didn't exist?
Right. And that is so true. I mean, and I know we'll theoretically like quote past it now, but like COVID, oh my gosh, I mean, I'm still having athletes that they're just like, yeah, well, that was my COVID year, and like just their opportunities of sport or with school. I mean, across the board, much more stress, much more anxiety, so many more stressors, and the reality is, people are still going to engage with social media. People are still going to engage with their phone. Like, we're not going to take it away. And so, some of the things I try to work with the athletes on is them being the one in control rather than their phone being in control of them, and being a little bit more judicious in that space. Also, I recognized, that's our phones are, I'm guilty of it too. Like, it's kind of like where we live sometimes, and so that's also been a recent mission I've been on over the last year and a half, is developing ways to increase the accessibility of sports psychology resources, because also, like, it's expensive, and not everybody has that, or they don't have access to it through their school or their program. And so I've developed a lot more like online programming and things that, like, through an app, these athletes can access and learn about performance anxiety, and the exact same tools that I would be teaching if I was meeting with a team or meeting with an athlete individually, but now they can do it, access it from their phone whenever they want to, and have that content and that information forever, and be able to ultimately meet them where they're at, because it really is a thing that the stressors and the competitiveness on student athletes has grown exponentially. And with the NIL stuff as well, I mean, it's such a wonderful thing that these athletes are finally going to get, you know, compensated for things that they have been getting taken advantage of for a really long time. But on the other hand, there's now this whole additional layer of stressors and dynamics within a team, and like yet another thing for the athlete to have to do. So it's these good things, and they're not going to go away, but it's how can we provide tools to these athletes to help them survive and thrive in these current new and evolving environments.
Hmm. And, one of the things that I've talked to student athletes about, just with, covering different sports and, you become closer with certain athletes because you've seen them kind of grow up and everything else. And with that whole COVID year thing, they're staying in school longer. And with having college, they're now 24, 25 years old, and they're still competing as a student athlete. Those
Hmm.
types of things are weighing pretty heavily on the mind of a lot of these kids. How have you seen, from your standpoint, kids are handling, the COVID year, handling staying in school when you're a full blown adult at that point, right? You're 25 years old, but you still have student athlete problems, and you still have collegiate athletic issues that you're dealing with. How have you
Yeah.
seen that those types of issues compounding over these years of dealing with COVID and just the elongation of your student athlete career?
Yeah, it's really just this interesting continuingly evolving stressor, and like the bottlenecking of recruiting. And I have some athletes that they were like, my COVID year was my recruiting year. And so I don't actually even know if I'm at the right school. And I've had a lot of that, of like, I chose this school because but was this the right place? I never got to set foot on campus. I did, like, the recruiting process was totally different. And then with them staying, it's that transition out of athletics where that already in and of itself is a really big identity shift and change. Well, now you're having people that are older trying to go through that, and you're right, it is something that does weigh. At least the athletes I've worked with that are going through that transition a little bit later as a function of some of those extra years of eligibility. And I've had some that they're like, well, I'm not on the timeline, or my other friends are doing this, and there's almost this like, I feel like I'm kind of stuck in this like kid space,
Hmm.
but everybody else around me isn't. And so I think it's for a lot of athletes and it's amazing that those extra years of eligibility were extended. Yeah, I mean, because there are just so many things, with those couple years, and NCAA championships being like canceled. Well, I mean, it was so bad. Um, but I think for those older athletes, it's making, for some, contributing to that transition out of athletics even more challenging than an already challenging transition is, because you're so
Hmm.
used to doing something for your whole life. It's part of your identity. It's part of like how you introduce yourself and who you are, and like the clothes you wear all the time, to now having to really shift that and doing so even later. It's been tough.
Yeah. So now we're at the point where, we've kind of had some different little nuggets of wisdom and stuff throughout the conversation. But, what's a piece of advice, something that, you kind of hang your hat on no matter what types of athlete or people you're working with, that you feel people should know?
Yeah. I laugh because I like some of the athletes I work with individually. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this word again. You know what I'm already going to say, but it's awareness. That is our number one superpower.
Mhm.
And with physical health, right? You can go and like get your forehead scanned, and it's like, oh, you got a fever, there must be something going on. We have those tools. With mental and emotional health, like, we are our thermometer. And awareness followed by acceptance are superpowers one and two. Because if I'm not aware and I'm not paying attention to myself, of like, wow, am I being more irritable? Is it harder for me to get out of bed? Am I feeling less motivated? Are things just not as fun for me anymore? Like, no one else is going to be able to tell that but me. Yeah, maybe other people are going to observe it and maybe like, hey, dude, like, you okay? But if I'm not bringing awareness to myself, well, now I can't even get in the game. You know what I
Right.
mean? To try to help myself. And followed by awareness, it's acceptance, where it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel stressed. It's okay to feel sad. so often I think it's like, oh, no, 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 I'm not stressed, I'm not sad. Ugh. But that more often than not just makes it worse.
Hmm.
And so the two superpowers that every single athlete and every human has the capacity of growing and using to help us thrive is awareness and acceptance. It's okay to not be okay. And if I'm paying attention to myself, checking in with myself so that I'm learning myself, well, now when there's a time that I'm going through some struggles, I can actually then enable myself with those first two superpowers of awareness and acceptance to take action. Whether that's reaching out to a friend, reaching out to a therapist, reaching out to a coach, a parent, like whatever. Like you can't take that action to help yourself get better if you don't have awareness and acceptance.
Yeah. So Megan, it's been great catching up with you. As you said, we've known each other for a very long time before we were going to know we were doctor or journalists. So it's always been great to catch up. But before I let you go, I kind of want you to let everybody know a little bit about your practice and, what you offer. Are you more on-site? Are you virtual? Are you both? Like, give us, how they can get in contact with you. So the floor is yours, and, you can tell us about everything that you have.
Yeah, awesome. So my website, which basically has all my contact information, is just drmegancannon.com. And I meet with athletes individually. I've shifted all virtual now, and so I'm able to meet with athletes all over the country. I've even had some international athletes, which minus the time zones was very cool. And then in terms of team consulting, I do that on site. I also do that virtually as well. And so, again, all my contact information is right on my website. And then more recently, with some of the online programs and platforms that I'm working to be able to spread these resources in a much more accessible way. I have a free training at mvpmindset.com that athletes can go and learn a little bit about performance anxiety. And through there, if they're interested in learning further, there's opportunities to like access that program as well through that website. And then I'm also on social media at Dr. Megan Cannon on Instagram, and then same with Facebook. I just launched this past week, again, in this mission of accessibility, a Facebook group that I'm going to be posting videos, and it's a free group, videos, articles, things like that, just to try to help coaches, athletes, and sport parents just be more equipped in that way. But ultimately, all of those things can be accessed through my website at drmegancannon.com. And then the free training is at mvpmindset.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, if you're watching or listening to this, all the links will be below in the description. So you can go ahead and click on those and reach out to Megan. I'll make sure all her contact info is there. But Megan, this has been awesome. I'm really glad that I was able to kind of get onto your busy schedule and we were able to link up, and, you can come on and kind of impart some of the wisdom and things that you've done throughout your career. It's been awesome to watch from afar. Obviously, we've been friends on Facebook since it was the Facebook and you needed a college.edu to be on there. But it's really cool to
Yep.
see that transition and everything else. So I really appreciate it. Do you have anything else for us before we close out today?
No, I love the mission. I love what you guys are doing. I think, student athletes, the best thing is just getting educated on, what the experience is like. And I love this platform that you're helping them be able to access all of these resources and education in a really easy way. And so I love what you're doing. I love the mission, and it's been fun following your journey as well. So thank you so much for including me on the ride.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Athletes to Athletes podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. To engage with everything the A2A platform has to offer, go to the App Store and search Athletes to Athletes to download our new app. You can check out our educational material, and you'll ensure that you don't miss when a new episode of the A2A podcast drops. Again, thank you for listening. We'll see you again next time.